All right, so let's just jump right in. I want you to picture this. You're in the passenger seat of an old Chevy Blazer, flying down the highway. The guy driving, he's typing out a business plan. This isn't just any plan. It's the blueprint for a $2 trillion empire that would completely change how we live. This is the story of Amazon. But before we get into the how, you really need to grasp the what. Just look at this number, $1.2 million. That is how much money Amazon makes every single minute. Not an hour, not a day, every 60 seconds. This isn't just some company that got lucky. It's an empire built on a strategy so methodical, it basically conquered retail, logistics, and huge chunks of the internet itself. And this quote, this is the secret key. Seriously, if you want to understand the entire Amazon machine, you have to understand this one idea. For Jeff Bezos, this wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a declaration of war on any business that was a little too comfortable, a little too inefficient. He saw their profits not as their success, but as his opportunity. So where does a world-changing idea like this even come from? Well, it didn't start in a garage. It started with a single number. Back in the early 90s, Jeff Bezos was a high flyer on Wall Street, a senior VP at a big hedge fund. He had the perfect job. And then he saw a report that said internet usage was growing by 2,300% a year. Not 23%, 2,300. That's not a trend, you guys. That's a tidal wave. Now, here's the interesting part. What do you do with a number like that? His boss literally told him that's a good idea for someone who doesn't already have a good job. But Bezos had this mental tool he used for big life choices. He just asked himself, okay, fast forward to when I'm 80 years old. What will I regret more? Walking away from my Wall Street bonus or completely missing out on the start of the internet? When you frame it like that, the answer's pretty obvious, isn't it? And this just shows you how all in he went. Look, it's one thing to quit your own high-paying job, but he convinced his wife, Mackenzie, to quit her job too. They packed up everything they owned and drove from New York all the way to Seattle. And while she was driving, he was in the passenger seat, hammering out the plan to sell books online. Yeah, the world's biggest store was basically born on an interstate highway. You know, for a guy who built a branding empire, he almost made a deadly mistake. The original name was Cadabra, like abracadabra. It was his lawyer who accidentally saved him when he misheard it as cadaver. Yikes. So Bezos went back to the drawing board and landed on Amazon. It starts with an A, so it's at the top of lists, and it's named after the world's largest river. Because he was never just building a bookstore. He was building the everything store. Okay, so let's go to that garage in Seattle, 1994. Forget Alexa, forget Prime shipping. All you've got is a founder with a laugh that people said sounded like a mad scientist and one simple, brutal philosophy. This is where the company's core identity was really forged. I mean, get this. They were so cheap, their desks were literally just doors with legs attached. A bell would ring every time they made a sale, until it was ringing so constantly they just had to unplug it. Their whole mantra wasn't get perfect fast, it was get big fast. They went public with zero profits, basically telling Wall Street, trust us, this is a long-term game. And then they did something that seemed totally insane. They let customers post negative reviews right on the product pages. Bezos knew that earning customer trust was way more important than a few perfect sales. So Amazon is riding high. They're the poster child for the whole .com boom. And then the bottom falls out. In March of 2000, the bubble bursts. And suddenly, the company found itself in a fight for its life. This was the moment that would either destroy them or turn them into something much, much scarier. And the crash was an absolute bloodbath. The stock went from over $100 a share down to just $6. The headlines all started calling it Amazon bomb. Everyone on Wall Street was predicting they'd be bankrupt within a year. The bell that used to ring for sales was long gone. Now all you could hear were alarm bells. But while everyone else was freaking out, Bezos got cold. He got surgical. He laid off hundreds of employees, slashed costs, and optimized everything. The company that came out the other side of that crash was totally different. The scrappy, chaotic startup was gone. In its place was a hardened, efficient machine with a new obsession. Build an infrastructure so powerful that you will never, ever be this vulnerable again. And this is where the real empire building began. Amazon unleashed this series of moves that you can only really describe as strategic kill shots. First, marketplace. They invited their competitors to sell on their website, turning enemies into paying customers while they collected all the data. Then, Prime. Everyone thought free 2-day shipping would bankrupt them.
Bezos saw it as a brilliant psychological trap that would lock customers in forever. Then, maybe the biggest masterstroke of all, AWS. They built the digital backbone for their own company and then started renting it out to everyone, even Netflix. And finally, Kindle. They weren't just selling books anymore. They were trying to replace them, giving them control over the entire industry.
So when you get this big and this powerful, it's inevitable. People start asking tough questions. And as Amazon grew into this absolute behemoth, let's call it a darker pattern in their strategy started to come into focus.
Yeah, see? Small businesses selling on the marketplace started telling the same spooky story. They'd have a hit product, selling like crazy. And then, one day, an almost identical product would show up, cheaper, and with an Amazon Basics label on it. The sellers accused Amazon of using their own sales data against them to create knockoffs and push them out. Now, Amazon has denied that this is company policy, but to a lot of small entrepreneurs, it really looked like the giant was eating its own young. And if you want to understand the culture that allows that to happen, this quote says it all. For Bezos, it wasn't about feelings or doing the right thing. It was about building perfect systems, mechanisms that would produce the optimal result every single time. Forget PowerPoint in meetings. If you wanted to pitch an idea, you had to write a 6-page narrative memo, forcing you to rely on data and logic, not charisma. The whole company was a machine built to optimize. By the end of the 2010s, he'd done it. Amazon was the everything store. He was one of the richest people in all of human history. The mission was complete. And so, he started preparing for the next one, a project he'd been dreaming about since he was a little kid. And you know, the company wasn't the only thing that had transformed. Just look at the man himself. The goofy, nerdy guy from the garage was gone, and in his place stood someone who looked less like a tech CEO and more like the final boss in a video game about capitalism. You could just see it. This was a person who had actually bent the world to fit his vision. His last few years as CEO were really just a victory lap. He bought Whole Foods to conquer the world of physical groceries. He got grilled by Congress to defend the power of the empire he'd built. And then, in 2021, he stepped down. He didn't get pushed out. He left because the machine was done. It could run without him. It was time to build the next. And this, right here, might be the single most important thing to understand about this entire story. We all thought Amazon was the point, that it was his life's work. It wasn't. The entire $2 trillion company that changed the face of global commerce, it was just the machine he built to make enough money to fund his real dream, the one he talked about in his high school graduation speech, the dream of going to space. So that kid who dreamed of building colonies on the moon, he now has more resources than most countries to actually go and do it. So as he turns his full attention from this planet to the cosmos, we're left with this one huge question. He's already completely changed how we live our lives down here. What on earth, or off it, is going to happen next?